Let's continue with more common ports and protocols you'll need to recognize for the Security Plus exam. In this section, we'll focus on network services, authentication services, and file transfer protocols. These questions often appear in troubleshooting or infrastructure-based scenarios, where you must determine which protocol is responsible for a specific network function. We'll begin with network configuration services. If a scenario describes devices automatically receiving IP addresses or network settings when connecting to a network, you are dealing with Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, or DHCP, which uses ports 67 and 68. DHCP automatically assigns IP addresses, subnet masks, default gateways, and other network settings to devices. For example, when a smartphone joins a home Wi-Fi network and automatically receives an IP address without manual configuration, DHCP is handling the assignment process. Now let's move into name resolution services. If the question describes translating domain names into IP addresses, that is, Domain Name System, or DNS, which uses port 53. DNS acts like the Internet's phone book by converting names people understand into IP addresses computers use. For example, when a user types www.cyberclarityinstitute.com into a browser and reaches the correct website without knowing the server's IP address, DNS is performing the lookup process over port 53. Now let's transition into directory and authentication services. If the scenario includes centralized authentication, user directories, or managing user accounts across an enterprise network, you are dealing with Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, or LDAP, which uses port 389. LDAP is commonly used by organizations to manage user accounts and directory information. For example, when an employee logs into a corporate workstation using company credentials stored in a centralized directory service, such as Active Directory, LDAP may be involved in the authentication process. If the question specifies encrypted or secure directory communication, that is LDAP Secure, or LDAPS, which uses port 636. For example, if an organization encrypts communications between authentication servers and client systems to protect login credentials during transmission, it may use LDAPS over port 636. Now let's move into file transfer protocols, because this is another heavily tested exam topic. If a question describes transferring files between systems without encryption, you are dealing with File Transfer Protocol, or FTP, which uses ports 20 and 21. FTP allows files to move between systems, but does not encrypt credentials or data. For example, a legacy internal server allowing employees to upload website files without encryption may still use FTP over ports 20 and 21. If the scenario instead requires encrypted file transfer over a secure channel, that is Secure File Transfer Protocol, or SFTP, which uses port 22. SFTP operates through Secure Shell, or SSH, providing encrypted authentication and file transfer. For example, a company securely transferring payroll reports between offices over the Internet would likely use SFTP on port 22 to protect sensitive information. Another variation is File Transfer Protocol Secure, or FTPS, which commonly uses port 990. FTPS adds encryption to traditional FTP by using Secure Sockets Layer or Transport Layer security. For example, a business upgrading an older FTP environment while still maintaining compatibility with existing FTP infrastructure may implement FTPS over port 990. A common exam trap is confusing SFTP with FTPS. The key difference is that SFTP runs through SSH, while FTPS is FTP combined with SSL or TLS encryption. Now let's bring everything together using recognition patterns, because this is how you move quickly through protocol questions on the exam. If the question describes automatic IP addressing, think DHCP on ports 67 and 68. If it involves translating names into IP addresses, think DNS on port 53. If it focuses on directory services or centralized authentication, think LDAP on port 389. If it specifies encrypted directory communication, think LDAPS on port 636. If it involves unencrypted file transfer, think FTP on ports 20 and 21. If it describes encrypted file transfer through SSH, think SFTP on port 22. And if it involves encrypted FTP using SSL or TLS, think FTPS on port 990. The most important takeaway is to connect the service to the role it performs within the network. DHCP provides addressing. DNS resolves names. LDAP manages directory authentication. FTP transfers files insecurely. SFTP transfers files securely through SSH. And FTPS secures traditional FTP communications. If you can recognize those service behaviors and understand how encryption changes the protocol selection, you'll be able to quickly eliminate incorrect answers and confidently select the correct protocol and port on the exam.